The first tool we're going to talk about is Azure Advisor. In your Azure tenant, you should have access to a cost management portal that'll show you cost management details. We looked at that the first week. There are some customers where your partner is not allowing you to see cost management. That's something for you to work through with them. Various reasons that partners do that. We generally want our customers to see that data, so we enable that functionality for our customers. Cost management gives you a lot of visibility and dashboards on what you have. Another portal in there is the Azure Advisor portal. And what it is, it's a set of recommendations. And this is kind of the splash page for this. I just searched for Azure Advisor on Google and found the link to it. This shows you a lot of what's going on in Azure Advisor. It gives you a lot of recommendations across cost, security, reliability, operational excellence, and performance. And this could be really valuable data. It's built off of Microsoft's database of all the VMs they're running and their recommendations and their best practices. And this tool could be really helpful. We'll get to cost in a second, but let's talk about the other things it can show. It can show you security best practices. Great to look at that. Hey, you should enable this security feature. Hey, you have an open port here. Hey, your blob storage has got a public URL that's vulnerable and should not be open to the public, that sort of thing. Reliability tends to be recommendations around ways to run Azure in a more reliable format. One of the powers of Azure is the ability to build highly redundant systems. You want a website that won't go down when a data center goes down, or you want to fail over your system from one region to the other in the case of a natural disaster or a server outage or a network outage or a regional network issue. You're able to do that with those functionalities, and they'll give you recommendations along those paths. Operational excellence tends to cover more best practices in the proper way to run things in Azure. And finally, performance will give you data like, hey, that's some of what I talked about a second ago. They'll give you recommendations on, hey, this VM is 3 times the size it needs to be. You could save 75% of your costs by dropping it down 2 sizes. And so it's really valuable to go look at this. We look at it every time. The pricing one, the cost savings is really valuable. They will show you information on the reservations we've talked about. These are the VMs we recommend that you adjust and put a reservation on, and here's what it will save you. Now, the numbers they put in here are based on a 3-year reservation. So it's important to remember that this savings here is assuming you want all of these servers to be running for 3 years. So it's important to review that and understand the numbers. You could probably take 20 to 40% off this number if you're going to do 1-year reservations. Still valuable data, still helpful. Go look at the Azure calculator. We'll go poke with that again in a second to verify your numbers. But keep that in mind on that page. On this page, on this Azure Advisor section is also where it will tell you if it thinks you have VMs that are too big. It'll literally say, hey, this VM never uses more than 20% of its compute power. We recommend you drop it 2 sizes. There's really good data in there. It's really important to look at Azure Advisor. Azure Advisor will also tell you about reservations and cost savings plans on certain resources that are not VMs. So things like disks that aren't attached to something, so they're just sitting there unused, costing you money. They'll talk to you about savings plans, which we'll talk about in a second. They'll talk to you about maybe a reservation on a large disk, or a database, a Cosmos DB or an Azure SQL DB. There's reservations for resources in Azure that aren't just VMs. And they're beyond the scope of what I want to get to on this call. But if you have a larger Azure presence, it is important to evaluate the value of those reservations for non-virtual machine resources. They'll show you a lot of best practices and show you all kinds of interesting data. And all your recommendations are right there. There's information on the Microsoft Learn. If you haven't played with Microsoft Learn, there's a course called Getting Started with Azure Advisor. It'll walk you through all of the things in here. The course is 37 minutes long with 9 units. It's pretty quick and easy, but it kind of gives you a run book on how to do that. There is also the Azure Advisor will funnel you into it has security recommendations, but there's a lot more security recommendations in the Defender for Cloud portal when you enable that. That's a whole nother can of worms we're not going to get into today. Azure Advisor is free. I highly recommend it. The one thing it is missing that you will see, and this is actually missing in a couple of the private cost management tools, is it doesn't tell you about AHUB, Azure Hybrid Use Benefit. It's kind of the biggest savings on your VM. and Microsoft doesn't advertise it this way. You need a partner or somebody understands it, or your own understanding to go in and understand where that applies. So keep in mind, this is not the only answer. There's sometimes more data points. And Azure Advisor also doesn't always help you kind of get to the bottom of where your costs are. We often see costs are ballooning because of subtle details, like maybe you're running Microsoft Sentinel and your log analytics is just kind of growing on you. You don't realize it, or you got a lot of input and output. Somebody's restoring a bunch of data from archive storage, and that's costing you. So it doesn't always give you a complete story, but it's a useful tool. Great to go check up on it. I recommend if you're managing Azure, I'd be an Azure Advisor about once a month, just looking for recommendations to cover that.